Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome to Ethics Week 2021. My name is Brett Beasley, and on behalf of the Ethics Week Committee, I want to thank you for being with us today. And I also want to thank our sponsors, the Mendoza College of Business, the Notre Dame Deloitte Center for Ethical Leadership, and Chase Bank. So despite the challenges of COVID-19, this 24th annual Ethics Week is going strong. We got started yesterday with a fascinating look at the science of empathy with Professor Chris Adkins. And today we're excited to welcome several of our students for a conversation focused on empathy and racial justice. After we hear from our panelists, we will have time for questions. So I encourage you at any point in today's session to submit your question using the Q&A tool, and we will answer as many as we can. Our moderator for this session is Professor Jessica McManus-Warnell. Jessica teaches in the Management and Organizations Department here at the Mendoza College of Business, where she focuses primarily on the areas of business ethics and sustainability. Jessica is the author of Engaging Millennials for Ethical Leadership, and most recently of a really fantastic article out this week from the AACSB about what Notre Dame is doing and what other business schools can do to foster what she calls an ethical reset. So I encourage you to check that out. And at this point, I'll thank you for joining us, and I will turn things over to Jessica to introduce our panelists. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks so much, Brett, and thanks for all you're doing to bring Ethics Week 2021 together to all of us. Our topic today, again, is Notre Dame Student Voices on Empathy and Racial Justice. And of course, racial justice is not a new topic, but the tragedies of recent history in our own country have brought these challenges to equitable, inclusive communities into sharp focus, and no communities are immune from these challenges. As we examine critical issues like this one, it's fundamental to note that no campus discussion is complete without featuring the perspectives of our students. I'm very fortunate to be joined by 4 of them today. Faith, Assan, Michael, and Max will speak today on their efforts here at Notre Dame. Each of these students have taken meaningful steps toward greater awareness of and progress toward racial justice on our campus. I'll introduce each of them in the order of their remarks. We will hear from each of them, and again, we hope to have some time for questions after all 4 have shared their perspectives. And again, we encourage you to use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and we'll do our best to respond in the time that we have. So now to our panel. First, Faith Ochanwa was born and raised in Limbe, Cameroon, and has been living for the past 5 years in Chicago. She's focusing her studies on corporate finance and investments as a member of our MBA class of 2022. Assan Mohar hails from Brooklyn, New York. He is also a member of our MBA program, class of 2021, with concentrations in business strategy and operations management. Michael Perez is an undergraduate senior, class of 2021, from El Paso, Texas. Michael will graduate with a BS in mechanical and engineering this spring. And Max Siegel II is an undergraduate junior from Indianapolis, Indiana. He's studying global affairs and psychology as a member of Notre Dame's class of 2022. So Faith, Assan, Michael, and Max, the virtual floor is yours, and I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right. So Faith, hopefully those slides are up there and you can go ahead and get rolling whenever you're ready.
Oh yeah, thanks, Jessica. Can you move to the next slide, please?
Thank you.
So thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel today. I normally don't take it lightly when I'm given an opportunity to share my perspective on important issues, which are actually, driving our times now. I'd like to start, mindful of time, I would like to start with a very brief backstory about the reasons why I decided to join the Notre Dame MBA program. So 2-3 years ago, while I sat at home or sat in my office, I thought about what kind of MBA program I wanted to be a part of. And every time I thought about it, there were two qualities which kind of, stuck out for me. I wanted to get a holistic education, and I wanted to be a part of a small, tight-knit community. A holistic education because right from a very young age, my mom had always brought me up to appreciate the the servant leadership qualities of a business professional. So the core values of Mendoza Business School actually resonated with me in that perspective. Secondly, a small, tight-knit community. I didn't just want to be in a business school where I would be a number. I wanted to be able to, create and make those meaningful relationships with my classmates while enjoying my MBA experience. So Mendoza kind of checked all those boxes for me. I visited all those schools and I finally made up my mind. Mendoza was the place I wanted to be. So coming to Mendoza, I had a very interesting experience. I realized that I was the only person of color in my class when I got here. Even though I was able to create those meaningful experiences I actually yearned for in spite of COVID, I felt that there was a level of support and understanding I did not get because I didn't have people who looked like me in class. To say it out plain, I was the only person of African descent in my class. If I have to go down into the details, it made it really hard because several times I would have to explain myself at least 3 times, or deal with stares or awkward silence that comes after I speak my own fair share, just because of my quote unquote unique perspective. So I didn't get that soul therapy that comes from discussing such issues with someone who looks like me and most probably is going through similar experiences. Imagine how much this has kind of been dampening my MBA experience. Well, my hope is that moving forward in the future MBA cohort, Black and Brown students will have a completely different experience from mine. Well, in the classic Notre Dame way and the way, my mom has actually brought me up to be, I decided to use this challenge as a stepping stone. I let this experience actually motivate me to join efforts with people on campus, to drive and improve diversity and inclusion in the MBA program in particular, and in the community at large. My contributions to Notre Dame community. I have been able to talk to potential MBAs, especially those of the Black and Brown community. I've been able to encourage them to come and join the Notre Dame MBA program, to experience this MBA program, so that we can boost we can boost the diversity percentage of the school, and also include these people as part of our community. I have also joined the student ambassador group, where I've been able to join my voice with other voices that are actually speaking to promote diversity and inclusion on the Notre Dame MBA, on the Notre Dame campus. So moving forward, what are the important next steps I think, or I recommend that the school should actually implement? It comes natural for me to recommend that the school should bring in more diverse students in every sense of the words. Student ambassadors can help in targeted advocacy to this end, speaking out on the various social media platforms and encouraging students, reaching out to personal connections, reaching out to other communities, encouraging these people of diverse backgrounds to join us in the Notre Dame experience. Active listening. Active listening communicates empathy, and taking action against any form of injustice is a sure way to build stronger community. Next slide, please. It would be unfair to It would be unfair to make all these recommendations without appreciating the effort of the school, the effort the school is making right now towards moving the needle on issues related to empathy and racial justice. Notre Dame has just launched an initiative on race and resilience, which is actually focused on redressing systemic racism and supporting diverse communities, both within and beyond the Notre Dame campus. One thing I have learned in the Notre Dame community is that Notre Dame is interested in educating both the person and the heart. Education doesn't mean anything if it's just head knowledge without cultivating the heart. So educating the heart actually means unlearning all forms of hate and bias, be it racist bias, gender-related bias, or even homophobic bias, and relearning the language of love. I feel that empathy can be summed up in the word love. I strongly believe that this new initiative the school has started would provide that much needed space at Notre Dame to address issues of race and racism. I would like to conclude with the words of Audre Lorde. Her wise words, she said, life is short, and anything that has to be done in the now. Let us all be a part of the solution to racial injustice. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith, and thank you, Jessica, for having me on the panel. And hello to everybody who is joining. My name is Assan Mohar. Again, I'm a second-year MBA. And today I want to take this opportunity to discuss the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force that was recently created by the students at the Graduate Business School. This task force included myself and 5 other MBAs, including Molly Lawrence, Eric Sweeney, Elena Westbrook, Sam Fioroni, and Jenna Scheimer, all of whom are also MBAs. And this group formed in the summer of 2020 with essentially the objective of creating more of an inclusive and diverse space at the Mendoza College. But before I begin talking about what this task force is about and what we've been working on, I wanted to take a few moments to talk about why it was important for me and any of us in this group to kind of take some action and try to work on diversity initiatives. When we consider education at a business school, especially a business school at a religiously affiliated university, I think there's a certain thoughts that come with that combination that holds a very unique space in the discussion of DEI. We can imagine some of the hurdles that underrepresented groups in such a space might face in pursuing their journeys within such an environment. For example, if a woman, for example, wants to pursue a career in business and sees that there isn't equal representation within the business world, including at business schools, she might have to, wonder whether she will be allowed the same opportunities as her male counterparts. Or when we think about historically predominantly white institutions, we can imagine that a person of color who wants to join might have some reservations on whether they will find the same community as everybody else. Or for a more religiously affiliated space, we can think of people of other faith affiliations, or even people from the Pride community, wondering if they will be as welcomed as everybody else. I speak about these concerns in relation to Notre Dame, but of course they're not limited to Notre Dame, especially in the world of business. I'm sure many of us have heard different statistics and stories about just the lack of diversity in the corporate world. But I think that for a place like Notre Dame, these concerns and these dynamics can lead to various ripple effects. For one, they can perpetuate the lack of diversity issue that already exists. They can potentially lead to a lack of belonging for students of minority backgrounds. Broadly, I think that everybody else in low diversity environments can kind of miss out on a more enriched experience that would include voices and ideas from different perspectives. And further, I think institutions like Notre Dame have a lot of ability to provide really amazing opportunities to people. But if they fail to attract people of different backgrounds, then I think that that can lead to an uneven distribution of opportunities, which in turn kind of leads to further inequalities in the broader society. So I think that there's an almost ethical obligation for Notre Dame to ensure that it promotes diversity and equity on campus. And so these were really the concerns and discussions that I had and a number of my peers had that really became a catalyst for the formation of this task force. So when we came together, a number of us MBAs, what we wanted to do was really create a certain mechanism that would have more of a longer term impact on DEI at Notre Dame, and that would both increase diversity in the graduate business program and create more of a positive lived experience for members of minority backgrounds. To begin pursuing this goal, we spent several weeks mostly just conducting research. This included online research, interviews with experts in the field, meeting with student feedback groups, meeting with different departments within the graduate business programs. And at the end of our research, we came up with about over 40 recommendations that we thought were very important first steps for the business school to kind of pursue to move towards more of a diverse and inclusive space. Since there isn't enough time to go through all of the 40 recommendations, I want to talk about sort of these 4 themes. And if we go to the next slide, there are these 4 themes essentially that all of the recommendations fall under. These are transparency, investment, mentorship, and signaling. Transparency calls for Mendoza College to have a more open and public, plans and discussions on how the school is working on DEI. This will provide more information on our achievements as well as our shortcomings, and will create more accountability in how much priority is being given to diversity, equity, and inclusion at the school. Investment asks that we need to go beyond our promises to be more inclusive by being more, by putting more financial resources and time and planning to create a more equitable space. Mentorship asks that resources be made available to those members who need additional resources to fully flourish here. And signaling asks the school to be a more vocal and public leader in supporting DEI initiatives. As we were working on our research, an important element for us was to create more of a collaboration with the administration. This was to make sure that the work we're doing actually converts into implemented actions. And we were really grateful to gain a lot of support from the administration. When we presented our final findings, we were really grateful to have pretty much the entire administration join us to hear the findings we had, including Dean Kremers. And we received a lot of positive feedback. And so far, we're currently working with different departments to kind of figure out how many of these recommendations can be implemented. Going forward, the hope is that the momentum that has been built up with some of these initiatives will continue, and that the Graduate Business School will continue to explore practical ways to address the topic of DEI, and that the different promises we make around this topic will continue to convert into actions. One other hope that I have is that there will continue to be more engagement from the student body. Personally, it's been really inspiring for me to work with and learn from these incredible leaders from within my class. I think that we as students have a lot of influence on how our school kind of treats diversity and what it does to improve it. We especially have a lot of influence on the lived experiences of students of minority backgrounds. So I hope that we all kind of continue to realize this influence and use this influence to make and create a more of a inclusive space around us. And I say that not just for the graduate business programs, but everybody else on campus as well. Finally, before I conclude, I want to address the theme of empathy that we are celebrating during this Ethics Week. So I discussed a number of concerns that my peers and I recognized that motivated us to kind of become more active in finding solutions to how we can create more of a inclusive space at Mendoza. I think that the recognition of concerns of our fellow peers requires a certain amount of empathy. And once we build this empathy for each other is when we can also build up more courage and motivation to become more proactive in finding solutions for the challenges of our fellow peers. And for that, I hope that we continue to have these discussions on DEI, not just today, but in the future as well. And to that end, I will also say that my contact information is on the slide. So if there are any recommendations or advice as far as how we can do better in the task force, I'd love to hear that. More broadly, I'm also serving as the Chief Diversity Officer of the MBA Association. So if there are broader advice or recommendations, I'd love to hear that as well. And with that, thank you all for listening. And I'll pass it back to Jessica.
Excellent. Thank you, Assan. And I really am so grateful to see that each of you are providing some places to go so people have some resources when they leave us today. So I'll turn it over to our two undergraduates. First, we'll hear from Michael, and then Michael, you can hand it off to Max for us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Perez. And for the past year, I've been working with Notre Dame's Office of Multicultural Student Programs and Services as a senior fellow. One of the projects that I've been working on with MSPS has been this mindful initiative. And you can see at the beginning of the word, it's a little bit of an acronym. Mindful is focused on microaggression intervention at Notre Dame. So that's what we've been doing. MSPS is, as I said, the Office of Multicultural Student Programs and Services. And the mission of MSPS in a nutshell is to create a welcoming environment for all students through support and education. Support could look like one of the events that we hosted last semester. We set up a stage on South Quad, and then we brought in a whole bunch of food trucks, and we invited all of the multicultural student groups on campus to perform on that stage. So we created a great environment for students to come celebrate their multicultural identity, to talk about issues concerning race and ethnicity, and just build community here on Notre Dame's campus. And then the Mindful Initiative that I'm here to talk to you about today is a perfect example of education. It's a student-led workshop that focuses on helping students identify and learn what microaggressions are. That way they know how to react if they're in a situation where they've seen somebody microaggressed or they've been the person who's been offended by somebody's words. I'm actually going to give a SparkNotes version of a mindful workshop so you can see kind of what we're showing the students and what we're talking about. I begin every mindful workshop with a little bit of motivation. I'm an engineer and we love numbers, we love statistics, so it's a great place to start. Every other year, Notre Dame administers this inclusive campus student survey. In 2020, about 5,220 people responded. And of those 5,000 people, 13% of students report that they've experienced some kind of adverse treatment here on campus. And that's undergraduate and graduate students as well. Of those types of adverse treatment, the most common were verbal comments, stereotyping, and offensive jokes. So this is really the aim of the Mindful Initiative. It's to try and make people more aware of their words and the effects that they can have on other people. More specifically, also included in the survey, you'll see that the vast majority of these aggressions, these offenses, were from students towards other students. So Mindful focuses on speaking to students and helping them become more informed about their words. We start out with some simple definitions. We talk about what is a microaggression. So it's a verbal or nonverbal affront directed towards a person of color. and it's often subtle, automatic, or even unconscious. One of the things that we talk about is that some people might not even know that they're offending somebody with what they've said. They might have some kind of unconscious bias programmed into their language, and they might say something that just rubs somebody the wrong way. So as the name of the initiative says, we have to be more mindful of the things that we say and the effects that they can have on other people. Next, we talk about maybe some of the different types of microaggressions. There's assumptions of criminality, when a person of color is assumed to be dangerous or deviant. Exoticization, when these people of color are objectified or seen as simply just their race. Assumptions of intellectual inferiority, when a person of color is assumed to be less intelligent simply because they're non-white. Or even pathologizing cultural values. So if somebody comes to the States and they don't have the traditional way of speaking or the traditional value system, they're looked down upon because of that. So simply going through those definitions and going through examples, we make students more aware of the many different ways that somebody could be hurt by words. And then after that, we provide this framework that tells anybody how to respond in a situation where somebody has microaggressed. It's a simple acronym, and the R stands for redirecting the conversation or interaction. So you may be in a classroom setting and somebody says something that's a little bit off color. You want to stop the situation and say, oh, hey, I just want to revisit something that was just said. I'm not sure if it came off the way you intended, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what you said, right? You ask a probing question next and you say, I heard you say that that student in particular is only here so that Notre Dame can check their diversity box. What did you mean by that? You know, you ask a question, you try to ask them what the meaning of their words was, the intended meaning was. Next, you use something called values clarification, where you appeal to some higher value system. So if you're in a classroom setting, you may have had a syllabus, received a syllabus that stated that all students in this classroom agree to engage in respectful dialogue that is meaningful and constructive. We are not going to be disrespecting people based on any personality trait, right? You could even go higher than that and use the values of Christianity, right? You could say that as Christians, we've all agreed to love and respect one another. And I think what you just said isn't really aligning with those values. Finally, you close things off by saying, look, what you said, it really made me feel like I don't belong or like I'm not welcome. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way and it made me a little bit uncomfortable. After having this conversation, I understand where you're coming from, but maybe in the future, could you phrase your words a different way? And then you move forward from there. Through this initiative, this was a super SparkNotes version, but these workshops are usually 60 minutes long and we go through a whole bunch of examples and we have a great time doing it. Through this initiative, we've talked to 1,200 students in the past semester, and we're aiming to match that number for this coming semester or this current semester. The end goal is to see an improvement in those numbers that we showed at the beginning of the presentation. 13% of the students who respond to that inclusive campus survey have had some kind of mistreatment based on their race and their ethnicity, and we're just trying to reduce those numbers in the future. Finally, I close off every mindful training, mindful workshop with this slide, really just to hit the key points that I want people to take away from both this presentation and my mindful workshops. The aim of this initiative is to foster kind and respectful dialogue. So it's not about coercion, it's not about controlling speech. This is something that we can do voluntarily to be better people, to be more understanding, and to cultivate fruitful relationships. So just like the theme of this whole panel is, we want to be more empathetic. We want to be understanding. We want to seek to hear first and then to connect with other people. We should seek to use our words to reason with one another, because these peaceful exchanges and compromise is how progress is made. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Michael. So now I wanted to talk about my story a little bit. I think it's really important to talk about this quick story I'm about to share to understand how and why I got involved. And I think that this quick story is really necessary. So before I start, it's just going to be a short version of the story that I wrote called Continuing to Speak on the Sign the Irish series that was published this summer. So if you guys are interested, you can feel free to read the full thing. But I'll just give you guys a short piece of that. So the story starts when I was getting out of high school. And so I was really naive, and I thought that, you know, everybody kind of shared my view, and everybody's my view on the world, and everybody was ready to really attack like social injustice or reaching out to community, like social service, stuff like that. But then I realized really quickly that that wasn't the case, and I oftentimes found that when I was, you know, hanging out in the dorms or with some of my friends, wherever we are on campus, that my own views and kind of like how I felt about different issues, specifically about social injustice, people would oftentimes make fun of me, or my ideals would be kind of like the butt of a joke. And so over time, it started to wear me down a little bit, and started me to speak up and talk about like how I felt or my views less and less. But I didn't really realize this until an instance over last, I guess it was 2 summers ago, where one of my friends, I forget what we were talking about, but one of the jokes inevitably came back up, where it was, did you know that Max knelt for the national anthem in high school? And I guess this one friend, he wasn't really like around at the time, or around the times that they told these jokes. But he like looked at me in disbelief, kind of like laughing, but at the same time really angry. And he was like, "Really? You knelt for the national anthem?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "How have you been oppressed?" And so when I was looking at him, there are plenty of like different ideas or like ways to address this question that were kind of like racing through my head. But eventually I just kind of stopped. I bit my tongue, and I started to think, if I share like any of these facts, or if I give my own reasoning, I'm probably not even going to be able to get it all out. I'll probably just get laughed at, or they're not going to listen to me. So I stopped, and I didn't really respond, and I just kind of sat there. And it wasn't until after that evening that I sat and realized that I've kind of hit rock bottom here. I didn't want to talk about anything. I was really just ready to kind of sit and just take everything that was thrown my way. And so it wasn't until this past spring, when George Floyd was murdered, that I was really kind of galvanized to speak. And it was because one of my friends at the time, she's still my friend, but she organized a bunch of rallies in downtown Indianapolis. And at first I didn't really want to participate, but then she was just like, "Max, you're coming. Like, you're gonna support. You're gonna be there." And so reluctantly, I kind of did. But when I did go, I realized that this is one of the biggest and most important things that I've ever been a part of, and it was really inspiring. And so I think that this is so from that point on, I started to write. I wrote this story, and then that writing takes me to my next page, actually, about what I've kind of done thus far. And so one of the biggest things that I've done is I've had conversations with Aaron Hoffman Harding, Provost Miranda, and Father Jenkins, and we got together as a group of minority leaders on campus, and we're able to have these conversations. They're still ongoing. We started in the summer, and they've continued till now. I've talked about Moreau, student life, residential life, many different aspects. And so I think this played a huge role in kind of shaping my view and where I am now. And so then lastly, that actually drove me to become a mindful volunteer as well, as Michael kind of gave you guys a Spark Notes version of that. And so what are some important next steps? I think that one of the most important next steps would be to have more like events like these. being able to continue the dialogue and really give a space for this discourse to happen. And finally, I think that one of the most important things that we can do is breaking the loop. And so what do I mean by breaking the loop? So the 2018 campus climate data showed that 32% of minorities weren't willing to recommend Notre Dame to people that look like them. And so that got me thinking. I started to think about this some more, and we've actually addressed this in some of the conversations. And it's harder to get people of color on campus when you don't have people that look like you around or willing to recommend it. And so this kind of creates a cycle where people of color don't feel comfortable within dorms, and then they start moving off campus. I'm pretty sure African American or Black undergrad students are the group or the demographic of people that move off campus the most out of all students on campus. And so because they're leaving, it kind of creates another cycle where other students that come in, other students of color, don't have other people that look like them. They don't have people that become RAs. And so then they start moving off campus because they don't feel welcome. And so there's this loop. So breaking the loop and encouraging and bettering the campus climate, bettering the residential life, the dorm life, is a really strong place to start and to break the cycle and encourage and invite students of color back on campus. And so finally, how does empathy factor into my efforts thus far? I'd say it's indescribable. I can't really put into words how much empathy plays a role into everything I've done, just because just being able to look at somebody and, understand how they're feeling or trying to understand where they're coming from, that's more than enough to motivate me and to kind of push me forward. And so I think it's really important too, because many people don't care about an issue of any kind until it hits, themselves or their community, which is an issue because in cases like this, we need to be proactive and not reactive in our understanding. We need to be able to go out and work to prevent a problem as opposed to patching a problem up after it's happened or after it's occurred. And so with that being said, that's all I have. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Max and Michael and Faith and Assan. I have your contact information here, and I'll leave this screen up just for a couple of seconds here in hopes that folks might be able to follow up directly with ideas or willingness to engage. But I'd like to stop the share after just a minute here so that we can display all the panelists and I hope answer some questions that might come from our audience. I would just, close your comments by sharing my gratitude. These are uncomfortable topics. We see this on the national level. It's really hard to have civil and productive discourse around racial justice in this country. And so we just, as a faculty team, are grateful for your willingness to come on and share your efforts, and certainly for your leadership on campus. It's really encouraging to see that so much of the change is being driven by the students, our most important constituents at Notre Dame. So thank you for your efforts. So I will stop my share. And let's see. Brett, I might ask you to get us started with the questions because it's not popping up as easily for me. I see. Go ahead,
okay.
Please.
Do you see it?
Let's see. Okay. Let me take that. I'm sorry about that, Brett. There it is. All right. So one question that we have, and I don't think it's directed necessarily at any one panelist, so maybe we can hear from each of you because I think this is a good question. So aside from more formal workshops and trainings, how can students bring more kindness and empathy to their friend groups in their peer groups and in the classroom? So if anybody wants to get us started with that response, that'd be great.
I think that something that oftentimes happens, when you're just hanging out with your friends, or maybe even in a class, if somebody says something that's potentially, insensitive or something that could be hurtful, whether or not it's to like make it less awkward or just because they just don't know, a lot of the times other people laugh about it and they don't really like care about or kind of like pay attention to the person who is like the butt of the joke or who is being laughed at. So I think in terms of whether it's you're in class or whether you're with your friends, one, speaking up and saying like, I didn't appreciate that comment, or talking to people. I think it goes back to empathy, and it's like, how would I feel if I was this person and they just made this comment or they just made this joke about me? And so I think that that's a really important place to start, and I think that will have like a really like powerful impact on both like in class and then also hanging out like in a friend group too.
I don't think it has to be a formal training environment for you to have these difficult and enlightening conversations with your friends. So during my time here at Notre Dame, I've had many of my friends come up to me and ask about something that they weren't getting. Maybe they had said something insensitive and then they had caught a lot of flack for it, but they didn't realize why what they said was wrong. So they come up to me and they ask like what did I do wrong here? I don't get it. And then we have the role and the responsibility to speak up and say, you know what? You have to think about it from another person's perspective. You need to take a second and realize that we don't have the ability to know what another person's experience is. And another person's experience might be so radically different from anything that we've ever seen that we really need to stop and listen before we can even start to understand.
So I agree with everything that has already been said. I just want to add that most times we tend to side with our friends and say things that is going to be impressive to our friends. But if you are more considerate, if you think about the implications of what you say, and like Max already said, like, how do I feel about this thing if it was said to me? If you always ask yourself that question, then several times the numerous things you want to say, the hateful things you want to say, you wouldn't say it because you wouldn't want it to be said to you.
Yeah, I'll say in addition to everybody else, I think it's important to just be proactive in engaging in those conversations. We earlier mentioned that it's uncomfortable sometimes to participate in these conversations, but I think until we do engage in those conversations, it's difficult for us to build an empathy and recognize the experiences of everybody else. And so just, I guess, be more willing to engage in those conversations and realize the different and unique experiences that everybody has.
Thank you. We have one question that's aimed at Faith and Assan. So to Faith and Assan, regarding your recommendations to the university, what concrete changes or structures evident from your research or your own hearts would you most like to see implemented at Notre Dame?
I can get started. So I mentioned there were over 40 different recommendations we had. So I think there's a long way to go. There's a lot that needs to be done. I think the first thing, and probably the most important thing, needs to come from the students and towards the students who are already here. I think that perhaps just just having this conversation about how do we build empathy and how do we make sure that people who are here are having a positive lived experience right now between us. I think trying to create that culture that is more inclusive is probably the first thing that needs to happen before we can think about long-term planning, which also is very important.
So I definitely completely agree with everything Hassan has just said. And to add to it, like I mentioned before, I think active listening is something that goes a long way. Like just listening to the suggestions that are brought up by the for instance, the students who listening to the suggestions that are brought up by the students who, are recommending more diversity and inclusion for the MBA program. Even just actually listening to instances of racial injustice, listening to the complaints of racial injustice and taking action shows a lot of empathy, and it communicates a message of wanting to build a community of inclusiveness, bringing in everyone. And it also sends a strong message to anyone who is gonna come in with some form of hate or division in that kind of community. So just setting up those structures where people can communicate, people can talk, and they can be an avenue to communicate these suggestions to the administration, who would in turn listen, will go a long way.
Thank you, Faith and Assan. That's great. And as somebody who teaches undergraduates, I'll aim this one at Michael and Max. For students who are struggling and who are experiencing some of the issues that you've described, and are not quite sure where to turn, what do you recommend? If maybe they don't feel as tapped into some of the resources that you have mentioned, where could they start to find some communities of support on campus?
Yeah, so I think one of the places to start too could be clubs like BSA or Wabruga or Shades of Ebony. I guess Wabruga is it's not an exclusionary club, so anybody can join, but there is like an emphasis placed, there's an emphasis for Black men, and so Shades is like the counterpart to Wabruga, and then BSA, Black Student Association. So we have there are a lot of clubs on campus that are similar to that, and so I think that could be an area to start in terms of finding communities, people like you.
Great student clubs. That's great. Michael, any other thoughts?
I will add that even the non-multicultural based clubs are a great place just to make friends and to find people who are interested in the same things that you are. So you could build community around things like rock climbing or robotics or engineering. There are tons of clubs on campus. And if you're feeling lonely or you need to meet somebody or make a connection, they're a great place to start.
That's great. As a mom of a new freshman in college this year, not at Notre Dame, at another great university, the challenges this year have been particularly acute, of course, for everybody. And I know that the mechanisms of clubs have been a great way for him and a lot of our students. So I appreciate that you brought that out and encourage people to take a leap and make some new connections that way. Another question we have that's come in. So there are people at Notre Dame, really throughout society, the questioner writes, who don't know what they don't know. So how would you respond to this idea of these blind spots? What have you found as a way to educate others on their blind spots? Again, things that maybe that hasn't even crossed their consciousness about some of these issues that you've described. And anybody can start us with that one.
What's been kind of helpful for me, I would say personally, trying to realize what my own blind spots are, is just being in spaces where you get to hear stories that you wouldn't otherwise, just going to events where you'll hear someone new, for example, being in this panel itself, hearing about the experience that Faith has had in my own MBA program. It's kind of, eye-opening in many ways to realize, what's the experience of another peer, and how are they kind of tackling the different challenges they have. That's very helpful for me. And I would say just be in spaces where you can kind of get to hear these unique stories.
So I would say that it is a two-way loop, right? It's in as much as we are asking for empathy to be shown to a certain group of people, we need to be empathetic to certain people who don't know what they don't know. So if you can judge that this person is actually coming from a place of ignorance, then I feel that the responsibility is actually on you to enlighten them. You know, kind of like in love, kind of chastise them, enlighten them, like, hey, there is a better way. Call upon that higher value in them, like maybe you should react in this way towards me. I know that you do not understand what is going on, but I feel that this is how what you have said or what you have done has impacted me, or this is how I feel about what you have done. So please, I advise you not to do it again. So if you do that once, twice, and three times, and you still get that same reaction from that person, then I don't know if it's a question of that person not knowing what they do not know, or a choice to actually be or behave in that way. So just to conclude, I'm trying to say that if you find out that these people really do not know and are acting from a place of ignorance and not from a place of resentfulness or from a place of hate, then the onus is actually on you to actually enlighten people like that.
I may be a little biased, but I think educational initiatives like Mindful are a great place to start. I've seen whole dorm communities attend these workshops, and I've seen tons of aha moments where students say, I had never thought about that. I never thought a joke could affect somebody so much. Or even during those workshops, we go through certain social media pages where students share their experiences here on campus, and just hearing those stories that they never would have heard otherwise, it changes people, and they understand that even here at Notre Dame, people are experiencing adverse treatment because of their race and their ethnicity every single day. And just knowing that opens them up to be more receptive to all of these ideas.
Thank you. That's great. And I didn't tell you ahead of time that I would ask this, but we just have a couple more minutes, and I'd like to ask if you would each offer kind of your last word. So as maybe students watching or faculty watching or other community members are spending their time with us today, maybe one thing that you hope people take away from our time with them and your remarks. Maybe we'll just go in the order that you spoke. So Faith, would you start us off?
Absolutely. So like I said before, I usually don't take such speaking engagements lightly, be it in a group of 2 people, in a group of 3 friends, 4 friends, or in a panel of 50 people like this. Every time I have to share an opinion on issues as sensitive as race, as injustice, I speak from a place of truth, and I speak from my heart. So if there's anything I'm going to say is, if you ever come in contact with a situation of injustice and you look the other way, then you are part of the problem. Every single one of us has a responsibility to make a choice and to take action every time we come in contact with injustice. Injustice should not be tolerated in any shape or form. Injustice against women, injustice against a certain race, injustice against the LGBTQ community, it should not be tolerated in any way. So I ask you, if you do not learn anything from this panel, one thing you should take with you is to never look the other way in the face of injustice, because if you do, you have invariably made a choice to side with the oppressor. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith. Assan?
I think along the lines of what Faith just said, it's sometimes when there is some kind of an injustice or something that isn't right, it's often easier to think that not being part of that problem makes you kind of gives you the immunity and makes you the right person. But if you see injustice and don't respond to it or don't take action, then in many ways responsibility kind of lies on you as well. So it's important to kind of engage whenever you can, think about how you're going to be proactive in taking action to become part of the solution. There were a number of things we learned today, from mindful initiative to some of the recommendations Faye talked about, or some of the things that Max is doing. I think it's important to think about how we're going to take these lessons and how we're going to apply them every day in our lives, and how we're going to become more part of the solution instead of just kind of walking away from the problem.
Thanks, Assan. How about Michael?
Well, I think it's great that initiatives or panels like this exist because they have us talking about these issues and keeping them at the front of our minds. These conversations are never comfortable because change and progress are uncomfortable. They require us to challenge ourselves and to reach into that place of really being patient, kind, loving, and respectful with one another. We have trouble with that today in our communities, but as long as we try to do that, and every time that we see an instance of injustice, we approach with that empathetic mindset, that's what we need to do. That's how progress is made. So that's the goal.
Thanks, Michael. How about Max, the last word?
Yeah, I'd say continue to speak on all of these issues. Don't let other people around you really start to bring you down and silence your voice. So just continue to speak on these issues, and when you can, educate yourself so you know what you're talking about, and just continue the dialogue.
Thank you. I'm just very grateful to this panel for your time and again, campus leadership. The future looks bright when we have people like you at the helm, and you really represent the best of what Notre Dame can be. So thank you. I'll allow my colleague Brett to have the last word. Thanks so much to all of you who joined us this afternoon.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you all. And thank you everyone who joined us. There will be a recording of this session available too that we invite you to share with other people. And I'll just close by saying you can join us again tomorrow at noon. We will have our third Ethics Week panel, which is all about working toward common ground, which I think is a great thing to continue this conversation. So we hope to see you then. Bye.